my official title is steward, and I've been thinking about this for years, but what that kind of translates into is land manager. So Baker Sanctuary is about 715 acres, and so I'm out here by myself. So essentially anything that happens out here, I'm responsible for. Travis Audubon Society bought what they call the original 94 acres back in the 60s, and they paid like $120 an acre for it back then, so they got a good deal. And they bought that property because back then they wanted a wildlife preserve of their own. They didn't have one, and they also recognized that golden cheek warblers were maybe becoming less abundant than they used to be, so they wanted a preserve for them as well. So they bought that property, and adjacent to that property was the Bakers' property. They had over 500 acres of kind of ranch land, and they got to know the Bakers. The Bakers didn't have any kids, and so the Bakers didn't want to see their property divided up upon their death. So what they did was they worked out a deal with Travis Audubon Society where they could have their estate upon their passing, as long as they didn't develop it. And they kept it as a wildlife preserve, as a wild space. We don't know a whole lot about Chell. What we do know is from letters that he had written and some newspaper articles that somebody had saved from the Austin Statesman. But he was, as far as we know, his parents or his grandparents were the original land recipients from the state of Texas for this area. So the land that they owned, nobody else, Europeans anyway, owned it before they did. And it's unclear whether he grew up here or not. He probably did. But in his 20s, he needed some money to pay off some debt, so he became a Texas Ranger down in South Texas. And he did that for maybe a year or two, just long enough to get some cash. And he came back, he rode his horse back here, paid off his debts, and as far as we know, he stayed on the property for the rest of his life. And so the Bakers, Chell Baker passed away in the 70s, and his half-sister Lena died in the 80s. And so once they passed away, Audubon got another 500 acres, which they added to their original 94. And then that was the bulk of Baker Sanctuary, but they did purchase another 10 acres on the north side, and they got another 50 acres donated in the southeast side when that area was developed for the Cypress Creek subdivision. Golden cheek warblers, like a lot of endangered species, their main challenge is habitat loss and degradation. And for golden cheek warblers, their habitat, they need roughly a 70% ash juniper to 30% hardwood composition for their woodland, for their breeding grounds. And this area is, Central Texas is prime golden cheek habitat, and obviously there's lots of development nowadays. And so back in the 90s, what they noticed was that a lot of land was being developed, the trees were being cut down, and so golden cheeks were not having as much breeding space as they used to, so that was a concern. And so Fish and Wildlife Service decided, the species warrants protection. So this preserve, it protects about enough breeding habitat for roughly 70 pairs of golden cheek warblers. We keep the woodland composition at such a ratio that we think that they're going to do the best to be able to find food and do everything that they need to do. And so that will, help the population as long as we can have this area that's producing more golden cheek warblers.